Hello, everybody. It is the second Sunday of the month, which means it's time for another episode of Gemcutting Conversations. My name is Justin K. Prim. I'm going to be your host this evening/morning, depending on where you're at. So, looks like we got a bunch of people from around the world. Thanks again for tuning in for another week or another month of conversations. This is going to be the last one of this year, which is kind of cool. So we have already done four, or well, this is going to be number 4 in this series, and I am super excited today. We're going to be talking to Maarten de Witte. Now, Maarten and I met way back. It's kind of weird actually, because we met way before we had any reason to. I was just a brand new young cutter exploring my extended locality outside of San Francisco, and he had got invited to come to give a talk at a local sort of gem cutting lapidary club in the Bay Area. And so that's like an early cutting memory of mine is kind of, taking the train for a couple of hours outside of San Francisco and going down into the Bay and going to this club where I didn't know any of the people, but I was like, wow, okay, cool. There's like an event going on that I can actually go to. So I went to the event, and Maarten was one of the speakers, speaking about diamond cutting, which I knew nothing about at the time. And I still don't know much about it today, which is why we're going to have an awesome conversation. And so somehow we've known each other ever since, and eventually came to know each other through social media and just kind of noticing each other here and there. And now today we find ourselves together on the internet in this Zoom room. So we're gonna have a little chat, a little gem cutting conversation. So Maarten, if you're ready, come on in, and we can get started. Hello.
All right.
Welcome.
I'm here. Good morning, everybody, or evening,
Or wherever you're at.
whatever is your proclivity.
Yeah. How's it going?
It's going good. It's cold out. It's hazy out, and it's still dark here, but
So you're
it's
coming
good.
from Boise, right?
Boise, Idaho. Yeah,
Cool.
and you know, I live here now because my grandkids live here. So there you go. It's not a big hub for diamond cutting, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Of course, nowhere I've ever lived in the United States has been a big hub for diamond cutting. So that's not a surprise.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit. I guess my normal beginning question, who are you and how did you get here? So tell us a little bit about who you are and how'd you get into diamond cutting? Because it's not such a common occupation in America these days.
Yeah, no, it's not. And it's an interesting question. And thank you, by the way, because the name of this webinar, you titled it Confessions of an American Diamond Cutter. And I got to tell you, that's going to be the title of my book when I write it,
Well,
which
when we
is
when we
being
were when we were
written.
talking the other day and you were telling me about the book, that was like going in my mind, and I forgot to tell you, I was like thinking about that, and then I
Yeah,
didn't tell you before, so I was just like, I'll just put it as the
it's a great title. It's better than whatever I had figured out. But basically, I was an old hippie back in the late '60s, and went to college for long enough to stay out of the army, and then they booted me out of there, and kicking around looking for what to do for work. And I had an academic background. My father was a professor, but I wasn't that interested in going into academics. He was from Europe, and in Europe, if you became a professor, it was sort of the culmination of your career. It wasn't the beginning of your career.
Mm.
So you did a career and then you became a professor to talk about that. Nowadays, in the United States, it's very different. Anyway, I wasn't interested in just continuing on forever in academia. And all my friends were involved with different kind of crafts, leather pounding and candle making and twisting jewelry and, stuff like that. Jewelry was always interesting to me. Art was always interesting to me. One of my first jobs was I worked as an apprentice for a sculptor. And, so that was appealing to me. And in my family, in my mom's side of the family, both my parents are from Holland. I was born in the United States, first American. But in her side of the family, I had heard about her uncle and her cousin were both diamond setters, and her cousin became a diamond setter studying under his uncle in fourth grade, so, and to me, that was interesting, and it was sort of in the back of my mind all the time. There was this guy over in Europe, blah, blah, blah. My dad went on sabbatical over there, and I decided, I went to go visit, and I thought I'd go ask him, what's the chance of me apprenticing with you? And so I did. I went and asked him, and he was at that time the cousin, my mom's cousin, who was an older guy at that point. Toward the end of his career, he had one client, which was the Queen of Holland, and he had done very well. His dad had done very well, and I said, "Would you be interested in apprenticing me?" And he goes, "No, absolutely not." He goes, "That's a total waste of time. My time and your time." He goes, "It's a dying trade. You don't want any part of it. It's go get a degree and become a psychologist or something. Go make yourself some money. Forget it. No." And so I was really disappointed because his shop was my idea of a real traditional craftsman. He was up in the attic of one of those buildings on a canal in Lathe, and he did everything with hand tools. He had a soldering iron rather than a torch. I mean, it was very, very interesting to me. And but he said no. And so I was like, okay, well, whatever, try something different, And on my way home from Europe, I stopped in London, and I met some kid who said, "What are you doing today?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Let's go to the Tower of London." And I said, "Yeah, well, whatever. What's the Tower of London? What's there?" And he goes, "Well, the crown jewels are there." And I was like, "Oh, okay." That grabbed my imagination. So we went and queued up for that. And at that time, the crown jewels were like 3 stories down in the basement in this vault. And it's different now. But then you walked around this pillar of displays of the crown jewels, and you had to keep walking. You couldn't stop and put your face on the glass and look closely. You had to keep walking. If you wanted to stop, about 4 or 5 feet away was a little platform where you could stand and look, and you were not supposed to take pictures because it was, security. And even if you did, it would be totally overexposed. But I saw the Cullinan diamond, and the biggest diamond in the world. And it took my breath away. It wasn't just that it glittered and it had light coming out of it. It beamed rainbow colors, green. It was just awesome. And so I stood back and looked at it a couple of times. I couldn't get close. But on the flight home, I was just like, damn, that's just incredible. I said, imagine being a sculptor of the finest, like this superlative material that's so mysterious, and it's an alternative form of wealth, and it's just got all this intrigue and mystery around it, and it's considered, still to this day, as one of the ultimate crafts. What the heck? Why not try that? So I got home, and I lived in Illinois, Urbana, Illinois, which is the University of Illinois, and there they have the 3rd largest library in the world, or in the United States. It's freaking huge. And I had access to it because my dad's a professor, and I went and got every book I could find about diamonds and poured through them looking for information on how to cut a diamond. Didn't exist. Did not exist. There was no information on how to cut a diamond. There was a chapter here and there about that would show you a couple of tools, and it would say, it's done, but no stepwise, it was a total trade secret. And that made it even more appealing to me. So long story short, I spent about 2 years trying to find a place where I could learn to cut diamonds. And I had no idea if I'd be good at it or even what it was really.
Yeah.
And I found this. I found an ad in the back of Lapidary Journal, one of these little half-inch ads that said, learn to be a diamond cutter in your spare time, make plenty of cash, kind of thing, like delivering Grit magazine. And I thought, well, and it was in Nevada. And I was like, Nevada, what the hell is that? That's not New York. That's not Antwerp. That's not Amsterdam. That's nothing. That can't possibly be anything. And I wrote letters off to, I wrote to the Belgian embassy. I had my dad translated into Dutch, trying to find a diamond cutting school somewhere in the world. Couldn't find one anywhere. It doesn't exist. It was all father to son, guild, that's how you got the information. Finally, I got a letter back from Belgium that said, we don't have a school, but there's one in the United States, in Nevada. And I was like, really? You mean that thing's really a school? So I called the guy and applied, and that's where I went to school. And it's up here, if you can see. I eventually took that school over, the American School of Diamond Cutting in Gardnerville, Nevada, Leonard Liddell. And he was a third, fourth generation diamond cutter originally from New York. He's Dutch, and he had this vision that the diamond cutting trade would die out if it was left to father to son, because the sons traditionally aren't as interested the further you go down the line. They're just doing it sort of because they have to, they've fallen into it. Yeah. So the passion for the trade gets lost over time. And so his son didn't want to learn from him. So he started this trade school, vocational school, to teach diamond cutting in the United States. And he was a total heretic. I mean, nobody in the trade liked that. He was roundly disapproved of, because he was allowing out the trade secrets. And in fact, he wrote the first book on diamond cutting, how-to book on diamond cutting, published in the United States. And it was published in 1985. Wow. Just to give you an idea how long that's been a trade secret. So yeah. I went to school with him. I became a bit of his protege because I was Dutch.
Around what year are we at right now for when you started?
I started school there in 1972. So I've been doing this for almost 50 years, 48 years. And oddly enough, he was interested in my skill set. He asked me, he said, it's mostly about whether or not you want to do it, and also your hand-eye coordination. And he accidentally dropped a little packet of Melly on the floor while we were having an interview. And I instinctively didn't reach for it. I just looked and watched where stuff went. And he looked at me and he said, wow, that's a good instinct. He goes, your eye is quicker than your hand. And those little suckers will take off on you. If you try and grab it, it'll go and you won't see where it goes. So you did actually the total right thing. That's kind of cool. I like that. And he goes, but tell me about your hand-eye coordination. I said, well, I hate to say it, but I got the mark of a misspent youth. I'm a really good pool player. Well, it turns out, I didn't know this, but it turns out he had just bought a pool table for his rec room behind his house. And so those two things put together, he said, okay, you're in. Of course, he was kind of a guy who, if you were interested, he'd take you. And the test was, there was no tests, and curriculum per se like that. He taught, and you would get a stone to cut, and you would cut it, and if you did a good job, you'd get a better stone to cut next time. And I mean, my first stone, I like to kid people, but it took me 2 months to cut it because, it's the first one. It weighed 8 points when it was finished. And about 7 points of that were an inclusion. I mean, this was some gnarly junk. And as you got better, bigger stones, cleaner stones, and bigger stones and cleaner stones, by the way, are easier to do. Mm-hmm. So the gnarly, nasty little ones, those are a pain. So but that was the school, and he taught, from beginning to nuts to bolts, how to be a diamond cutter, master diamond cutter. So that's my background. That's how I got into it. And I didn't know if I'd be good at it. And it turns out I liked it. It wasn't, it's a lot of machine work, but it's also a lot of artistry. It's interesting. Is it a craft? Is it an art? Who knows?
Yeah.
You know.
So you pretty much then you were in at that point. You kind of did this alternative style apprenticeship, and you learned all the skills. And so
Yeah.
what happened after you? Was there like a finale? Did you graduate at some point?
Yeah, there was a finale. He and I had a massive blowout fight, and I left. And because he didn't, I don't know. It doesn't matter, but
Yeah.
And I moved on. And back then, the way you got a job, there were no jobs in the industry. I had no family my cousin in Europe, it doesn't even count. I had no connections, no family in the industry. They weren't hiring in New York. New York had about 10,000 cutters at the time. But if you wanted work, you got a bench and you built a little shop and you beat feet and went around and tried to get work off of jewelers, repair work and stuff. And over the course of my career, the manufacturing in the United States is gone. It doesn't exist. Almost all the diamond cutting work that's being done is repair work, recuts, fixing nicks and abrasions and stuff like that, modifying cuts, occasional one-offs, but it's not manufacturing. It's not rough to finish anymore. That's all done. 95% of that's done in India. When I started in the business, zero was done in India.
Jeez.
Nothing. So
it's changed a lot since. And by the way, how long were you actually in school?
I was there for about 3 years.
Okay.
And the curriculum was 8:30 to, I think it was 8:30 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. And very shortly into it, he would take the better students and let them stay till 5, and he'd pay you this pathetic piece rate for an hour and a half. And then on Saturdays I would go in, and it was Gardnerville, Nevada, population 500.
Okay.
There was nothing to do there. So, school was the primary focus. That's what we did. And I stayed, and it was a typical 9-month program, but I stayed over the summers, and, I pushed it hard. And then pretty much you learned all the basics, and then you were out on your own. And I would say it took a few years of being in business alone before you kind of had a pretty good idea of what was going on. And I would say in the last 10, 15 years, I've gotten to the point where, it's not a struggle. If I need to cut a diamond, I can cut it. It's not, oh geez, how do I do this?
So then, so basically then you just sort of immersed yourself. You were in New York at that point to start off the career?
No, I went, he was in Nevada.
Yeah.
And then I went to, actually my first job that I got was to work in a diamond tool company in Indianapolis. From Indianapolis to Detroit, so through Muncie, Indiana and all that.
That's where I went to college.
There's a string of little industrial towns that fuel the auto industry. And Indianapolis, oddly enough, had a diamond tool company that made, what we made was little diamond tools with 45-degree angles and 60-degree angles that they would use to lathe pistons at Detroit Diesel and Cummins Diesel. So that's what I did. I just made tools with these hillbilly women. That was my first job. But eventually my first really becoming a diamond cutter, I built my own equipment and I went back to my hometown, Urbana, Illinois, which is nowhere. People in New York, you call them up for supplies and they go, you cut diamonds in Illinois? What's out there? And I go, corn and soybeans, but I just went out to all the jewelry stores and asked for work. And I was 21 years old, and they looked at me like, what the hell you know about cutting diamonds, you young punk. And so I would say, look, give me, it took me a while to figure out the sales rap, but basically it was, I know your jeweler has a broken diamond on the bench that your cutter in New York won't touch because it's too small and too big a waste of time. So why don't you let me have that, and I'll cut it for you and show you what I can do. And I would get little 20 pointers and stuff, and I'd make ideal cuts out of them. And I would build my business from that. And they get some trust based on that. And I was local, so it was easier than, because back then you had no FedEx, one day shipment on. If you want to send something to New York to get cut, it took 10 days to go registered mail to get there, and then 10 days to come back, and God knows how long in that black hole it just sat there waiting to get done. So they were happy to have somebody that could pick up and deliver, or that they could just mail it to close by. Okay. So that's how I got started.
Wow.
Yeah.
So kind of humble beginnings, but you as we'll find out later, you got into a lot of stuff between then and now as far as projects and different things. Well, before we get too into that bit of the story, I wanted to, let's take a little bit of a moment, because I know for me as a colored stone cutter, and maybe for many people in the audience who are colored stone cutters, let's talk a bit about the actual process of cutting and like the different steps that there are. And maybe we can compare a little bit about what you do versus what I do, just to see what's the same and what's not the same. So,
well, okay.
I know now, or I think you told me this before, but most of the stuff that you work with is with recutting now, right? Not so much with rough. Has it always been like that, or was there a phase in your career where you were doing rough as well?
I've done rough. I mean, I do it as I see it, but rough is it's an interesting business. I mean, it was controlled by De Beers forever, and last 20 years, not so much, but it's still the same system. It's a capital intensive business. You got to have a lot of capital to belly up to the bar to buy rough at a reasonable price. If you don't, you buy from people who have done that, and so you're paying more. Yeah. And they've already cherry picked the good stuff to manufacture. So it's virtually impossible, unless you have millions of dollars every 5 weeks to spend. Virtually impossible to get good rough to manufacture. It can be done. I mean, there's people who go to a good buddy of mine goes to Africa and gets rough, and that's still doable, but it's spotty. It's more difficult for sure, and then it's one-offs. It's not so much manufacturing as finding some decent stones and then getting the best out of them that you can when you get back. So they're not, it's not, oh, I'm going to buy a whole parcel of things that are turned into half caraters. It's not the deal at all. So pretty much it's been that recuts and some contract work. Okay. But usually if somebody calls me and says they have rough, I'll go, oh, that's interesting. Let me see it. Let's see what you're talking about. And 99 times out of 100, it's some piece of industrial garbage that somebody told them was the rough diamond. So, but let me explain something real kind of quickly about the big difference between color stone cutting and diamond cutting. The reason there is a difference in the trade, and it's traditional. There's very few people that do both. Diamond is superlative. It is the hardest substance that we know. Hardness in terms of against pressure. So on the Mohs scale of hardness, talcum powder is 0, diamond is 10, and sapphire is 9. Mm-hmm. So sapphire is the closest to diamond, but from 0 to 9 is less than the hardness of 9 to 10. So diamond is way harder than anything else. And because of that, the only thing that can cut a diamond is diamond. So diamond dust, you can cut any gemstone you want, no problem. But to cut a diamond, you can only cut it in certain directions.
Yeah.
So even though diamond is the hardest substance there is, it has directions within it that are harder than other directions. And the fact that you can take dust, crush up a diamond crystal, and get dust that is basically, each particle of dust is a little diamond crystal. It has hard and soft directions. Randomly, that dust, if you put it on top of a wheel, randomly, there will be the hardest directions facing up on that wheel.
Okay.
Your job as a diamond cutter is to put the softest direction of the diamond you're cutting to run perpendicular to the running of that wheel, so that the wheel will cut your diamond.
Okay.
And so here is my diamond. This is a fluorite crystal from Illinois, state rock of Illinois, but it's an octahedron, which is what diamonds form as. They don't always look like this, but this is the internal structure of a diamond in its best form. I mean, it can be mutated and twisted and all kind of stuff like that. But hypothetically, this is what it looks like.
Okay.
And this crystal, let me bring it a little closer to the camera. If you can see it, it has triangular faces. It has places where there's a point, or here, there's a point.
Yeah.
There's an edge, and then there's how do I do it? And then there's a face. Here we go. There's a face. So the edge we call a 2-point. That's the grain of a diamond. Now, octahedron has 12 edges, so it has 12 grains. So if you think about woodworking, it has 1 grain.
Okay.
Wood. It's parallel all the time, but there's 1 grain, and you can cross cut it or you can split it. So there's different things you can do with that. With a diamond, there's 12 of those, and they interact with each other. So you have, and in order to cut along this edge, you have to run the wheel perpendicular to that edge. Now the wheel can run in this direction or in this direction. So even on the best edge, you've only got 2 directions that edge can cut at. One of them it'll cut better than the other. The one that it cuts better at is the one that's going to get the best polish. As you move away from that edge and toward the face, the center of the face is where 3 edges converge. That's the hardest spot on a diamond. And the absolute center of the face can take forever to cut on a wheel. As you make tiny little adjustments, you'll go from 1 grain to the other. And the other 2 will fight you, so it's very difficult to cut. And then there is the point, and that's where 4 edges come obliquely to a point. So when you cut across that, you want to cut across one of 2 edges. You don't really know which one it is, or so there's 4 options for the point, there's 3 for the face, and there's 2 for so this is called a 2-point, 3-point, and a 4-point.
Okay.
So those you have to, that's the key to cutting diamonds, is as you go around a diamond. So here, let me take this. This is a better example. This is a piece of wood that's an octahedron, and it's been, come on. It's been sawed in half. So here you've got an octahedron that's sawed in half. Now, this is what they call a sawed stone in the rough. And it has a natural pavilion on it. It has a natural table on it. And then they'll put a crown on the edge. And they'll make it round. But to make it round, it's got 4 harder spots than softer spots.
Yeah.
So to make it round, generally in the old European stones, this spot is harder to turn, to grind than this spot. So it'll be more cushion shaped.
Okay.
So that's the old European, is more cushion shaped. As they got it on a lathe, they got it rounder, and that was the old mine cut, the cushion shape. And then as they got it rounder, it became the old European, and that was done on a lathe. And I'll show you that in a minute. but I'll show you the equipment that we use for all of this. But I'm just sort of giving you the
Yeah.
rudimentary, what you need to know to cut a diamond. So you need to know where the grain is. And of course, as you see the rough, you can see the grain. On a recut, you can't see the grain because it's already been cut and polished. So you're just looking at a polished face. And the way you find the grain is you get a face flat to your wheel and you try and get it to cut. Once you get it to cut, then you know there's a grain perpendicular to that.
Okay.
So if I can find a grain, then I've either got a couple coming off of that in a triangle, or I've got a 4-point.
Wow. So you really have to
So
understand crystallography a lot to be able to be a diamond cutter. Like you can't just put it down in any random way. You have to really visualize exactly where you're at in that octahedral structure.
right. Well, you could feel it out on the wheel if you want to, but the problem is that the wheel is made of, I mean, my wheel is basically cast iron, which is much softer than diamond.
Mm-hmm.
So what's doing the cutting is the diamond dust that's embedded in the top of that lap.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you put your diamond down on the wheel in the wrong direction, it'll tend to cut through that layer of diamond dust and scour your wheel.
Mm.
If you put it down in the right direction, diamond dust will be removed from it and be from your diamond you're cutting and be pushed into the wheel. So cutting in the right direction makes your wheel stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Cutting in the wrong direction weakens your wheel.
Okay.
So you want to cut in the right direction as much as possible, because as soon as you get these scours in your wheel, you're going to get scratches in your polish. You're going to have all kinds of, it won't hold powder very well. You have all kinds of problems. So yeah, it's all about being what they call on grain, and it's really against the grain. You're cutting across the grain.
Okay.
But yeah, and so you have to visualize that. And so here's another thing that's kind of interesting about old mines. So old mines were typically made of a whole crystal. They didn't saw the stone. They just, whatever shape that crystal came in, they would make the biggest, prettiest stone they could out of that crystal. So let's say here's my crystal. If I would cut this to get the maximum yield out of it, I'd probably put a relatively small table on it, maybe a bit of a culet, and especially because these points are usually a little jagged, so you got to smooth them out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd have a pretty steep crown and a pretty steep pavilion. Now, if for some reason this diamond had a flatter spot on one of these grains, maybe I want to orient that flat spot as the table. Now I've got a flat crown and a flat pavilion.
Yeah.
Or maybe one of those triangular faces was the biggest face and I want to make it that way. Well, then it's kind of whatever I want. I can get maybe a steep crown, flat pavilion, steep pavilion, flat crown, a little of both. So you can look at an old mine and just by its contour, you can kind of begin to guess what the original crystal looked like. What way was the orientation? Of course, if it's oriented like this, there's a certain pattern that all those facets are cut on. If it's oriented like this, there's a completely different pattern that each successive facet is cut on.
Yeah.
And if it's oriented like this, this is generally the 3-point, so-called 3-point, except for the table. The rest of the facets cut like butter. They go really fast.
Okay.
Because you're almost never on a 3-point plane anywhere else, and you're almost never on a 4-point plane either. You're askew to them. So, most production cutting and most hearts and arrows cutting is done on sawed octahedrons, where they can orient they can orient the table and they can orient the grains to get the best polish and to get round brilliance.
Okay.
So
you've built up your knowledge of crystallography. I'm just trying to go through kind of school / the process of cutting. So you have this idea. So let's say you do, let's say you're in that hypothetical situation where you're starting with the rough. you need to saw it first, right? You have to start with sawing if you're not just gonna.
Well, I mean, depends. If you have an octahedron, typically they saw them because you can get two stones out of it. And typically what they do, unlike what I showed you here, typically what they do is they saw the top off,
Mm-hmm.
get a smaller stone, and then a bigger stone that's already got a portion of the crown made. Because economically, you'll get more money out of a bigger and smaller than two equal size.
Yeah.
Both a little bit smaller. So, because as diamonds go up in size arithmetically, they go up in value geometrically.
Okay.
So, you know, so it's always a question of value. You don't always saw if the rough yields itself to a round like an octahedron, you would saw the octahedron. Before that, like the historical stones, like the Cullinan, those were cleaved.
Okay.
And that is, the cleavage plane is parallel to
The face.
the octahedral face. So anything parallel to that you can cleave. The cutting thing is perpendicular to a grain.
Mm-hmm.
The sawing plane is perpendicular to the cube face.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's when you can pop the top off then.
Exactly. Now what they do today is they saw, and that's with a mechanical saw. So that's a phosphor bronze blade. Today they saw with laser.
Mm-hmm.
In laser, they can saw in any direction they want.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
So then if
Okay,
you've got a rough piece that you need to saw, can you do that at home, or you need to send that to somebody else, like a sawer?
I do such little amount of rough that I've never invested in the equipment to do that, especially not in a laser. That's insane money. So there's companies that do that, and you send it off to have that done. So generally speaking, if I get a piece of rough to cut, if it needs to be sawed, I'll have it sawed. If it doesn't need to be sawed, I'll take it as a whole stone and I'll make it. It's not a problem. So basically, as a cutter, that's the one thing. I mean, we did learn it at school, but it was sawing, but it was pretty understood that that's almost a separate trade. And cleaving already was something that wasn't done very much.
Okay.
So cleaving isn't done much at all anymore. It's, you know, they've just got better methods to do it. And in fact, today, a lot of people are familiar with laser, and now what they're using is water jet.
Yeah, I've seen
So they use a water jet that has diamond dust in it, and you know, clean, and they can cut it faster and cooler than with laser, and so that's the newest technology. And of course, I don't have that either. That's in the manufacturing plants. But let me show you some hand tools. I don't know if you were going there next, but so this is the classic diamond cutting tool. If you look at old illustrations of diamond cutters, this is what you'll see. Yeah. And it has, so there's what we call, in Dutch, this is called a tongue. Mm-hmm. I hear a lot of people call it a tang, but it's a Dutch term, and the pronunciation is tongue. And in any case, it's what holds the dop. Mm-hmm. The dop in this case is a brass pot, and it has lead work to a cone above that. So every facet you would make with this, you would heat this brass pot up. It would make the lead pliable, and then you would work the lead up to a point with your fingers. Okay. And then you, with a set of tweezers, you set the stone in there, and you form the lead over the top of that stone to hold it in place, and then you cool that in water. And then you would have one facet set to go. Okay. And then you, to get these different positions, cutting positions, you would try in one position. If that didn't work, you open up your tongue, turn your dop, put it in a different position. And of course, all the angles and all the adjustments were made with this copper wire. So we learned, you know, if you put a facet in there and it needs to be corrected a little bit, you bend the copper wire with your hands, with your thumbs or your fingers or whatever. So it's real hand-eye, and you spent enormous amount of time learning to get the facet flat to the wheel. So once you've got the facet flat to the wheel, you can start cutting the facet. Of course, any kind of heat generated in the process could affect the lead.
Yeah.
So you had to make sure that you had this bucket of water you could keep cooling your lead off to keep it from getting too hot and shifting the stone. If the stone shifted or you needed to make an adjustment, you bent the wire a little bit. The wire changes tension over time. Eventually it snaps, but that was 99% of the trade, learning how to get the facet flat to the wheel and how to make these minor corrections with this lead dot, with this copper wire.
Yeah.
Now this has been used for centuries.
Yeah.
Then the next level.
I've seen drawings of that going all the way back to the middle of the 1500s. So it's kind of amazing that somebody's still using that somewhere. I know.
Well, I learned on it,
yeah.
but even when we went to school, all we really used that for was tables and culets.
Okay.
And now I have a thing called a culet ticker. You just put it in that thing and the culet's done in a nanosecond. You know, the table, there's a more, in fact, this is a table dop here. So this is a mechanical dop, same setup, same hand piece, same copper wire. It's got fingers that will open and close over the top of the stone. And I don't have a pot set in here now, but different size pots for different stones, but still bend the copper wire. So if I'm cutting in one position and I've got the wire bent to be flat to the wheel at that position, if it doesn't cut there and I need to change the position of the dop, I've just changed the angle too. Yeah. So I have to catch it back flat to where it was before I can try it in that position. If that doesn't work, I got to open it back up. You know, very tedious. So this was the next iteration. And this was what we learned on in school. There was table dops, well, we didn't use the table dop so much, but top dops, bottom dops, and pots and fingers for all of that. Yeah. But we learned on the copper wire. Yeah. Now, I told you this joke, but the copper wire, my instructor was Dutch, and we always joked and said, we know the copper wire was invented by two Dutch guys fighting over a penny. Now, the next iteration, let me grab this real quick. Is this. So you can see it's the same thing again, but now we've got levelers on the feet. We've got a bubble level, so we can level the whole thing to the wheel. We can move from one position to another. Now, what's interesting is that doesn't mean it's going to be exactly flat to the wheel. Yeah. Unless that facet happens to be straight on that axis. Okay, so and depending on what degree you're on, what angle you're on, that can vary. So you're gonna have to do a little cheating. And so we have cheaters instead of the copper wire, side to side cheaters here, and then an up and down cheater for angle adjust. Angle here, azimuth here. Mm-hmm. And so, but again, the skills that you learn with the copper, you go from the seeing what's happening, and the way you see it on the diamond is you touch the diamond to the wheel, you touch it so lightly that all you get is a powder mark. You don't actually do any cutting. Okay. And you get that powder mark and it tells you where on the facet you are, and until you get that powder mark as a smooth little sheen across the whole facet, you're not flat. And as soon as you are, then you can try to cut in that position. Okay, that's cool. So this they call, this is called a semi-automatic. This I was not allowed to bring to school, not even to show the students. Had to learn this on my own. This is the only real difference in the technology here is instead of a copper wire, you got a screw. Yeah. And as I like to remind the instructor, the screw was invented by Archimedes. So it's not exactly new technology, but everything else is the same. So the cutting, the theory of the crystal, getting it flat to the wheel, making the angle changes, setting up facets, all of that remains the same. You still got to bring it to the wheel and do the cutting on the wheel. So mostly as a cutter, most of what I do is on the wheel, but what I'm going to show you next is before we get to the wheel.
Yeah, because this is the part I'm so curious about, because if you read about diamond cutting, they always talk about sawing, and they always talk about, you know, basically the polishing step when you're doing the facets. But I'm always curious, what about the preform? You know, because for us, the preform is such a thing, and I've never heard anyone explain preforming in diamonds. I have no idea what this next step is from after the
Well,
sawing.
okay, so the first step is going to be to determine where your table is, you know, and generally speaking, on a piece of rough, you will have held that rough in one pot or another and made what is going to be your table, or part of your table, at least a flat facet somewhere that's going to be the orientation of your table.
Okay.
Once you've got that, then you can go to shaping the stone. So, I mean, you have to have the table first.
Yeah.
And let me see if I can get the camera over here, and I'll show you what we do next.
Okay.
So, get this down here. Maybe I want to come up. There we go. So this, here we are. This is a girdling machine right here.
Okay.
And so it's a lathe where I can make stones round, or I can make ellipticals, I can make ovals, I can make marquees, I can make pear shapes. Any rectangular shape like an emerald cut or radiant cut, something like that, I can do those outlines on the wheel.
Okay.
They're flat, so I can do that on the wheel. But any curved edge is done on a lathe. Now, what makes this lathe, and let's see if I can get a picture of it there, so you can see the latheness of it. What makes this lathe unique, and this one is old. I bought it, it was probably close to 100 years old when I bought it, and I've been using it my whole career. It came from Lamb Company in New York on Broadway. This was when the Diamond District was on Broadway, not on 47th Street.
Okay.
So down in the Bowery. Anyway, so what makes this unique is most lathes are fixed, and what you do is you're going to put your whatever you're working, your wood or whatever, on there, and then you spin that wood and center it to the lathe.
Right.
This is an eccentric chuck lathe. So the chuck on it is on this plate right here, which is held in between two other plates.
Okay.
So I can tap that chuck with a little hammer, and I can knock it out of center.
Ah.
So what I want to do is I'll take a dop like this. Okay, this is a girdling dop. I heat this up on my little propane torch, and then I use this cement, which is a thermoset cement. So when this is heated, I can just rub this on here, and the cement liquefies. Take a stone, set it on there, cool it, and now a stone is set on here.
Okay.
Once that stone's set on here, I can spin it onto the lathe. Now it'll be turning here. Let me get this. No, I don't need that. So it'll be turning here. I have another one that's already set. Let's see if I can do this.
Yeah.
So on here, there's an industrial diamond set on here. That's my turning tool. So I'm rubbing two diamonds against each other. And it's called brooding because you're using brute force to just hold those two together. If you hold them together too lightly, they burnish. If you hold it together if you put too much pressure on it, you'll knock it off the dop.
Okay.
So you have to hold it just enough that it does the cutting. It's supposed to one diamond cut the other, and then that, and so you can turn it around. Now, what you can do with this eccentric chuck then is you can center your lathe to the diamond, because the diamond is more valuable. It's highly valuable material. So if I've got a recut, it's got a chip on one side, I can center it on my dop when I'm setting it, put it on here, I can knock it a taste out of center so that I'm just turning it from that edge that's chipped until I get a full circle.
I got you.
So that's, it's very basic. It's very, I mean, it's ancient machinery, and it's definitely, again, a hand-eye thing, and the feel is all in how you handle holding one against the other.
So then if you knock that chuck out of circle, is that also how you can make ovals, or is the oval shape done by the actual hand movement with that?
No, yeah, well, not so much that you knock, because it actually, everything runs better the closer you can get your diamond set on the dop to where you want it, the closer the lathe will be to turning true. If it's too far off center, it's going to create a lot of vibration, a lot of wobble, you know, in all your machinery. So you want it to be as centered as you can. So like on an oval, what you'll do is you have an offset dop that will, one side of it will come around, boom, 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 and then you change it, do the other side, and then the ends, you know, with a marquee, one side, then the other. So with a round, it's a real nice, smooth thing. You know, I mean, the marquees are, to be quite honest with you, the scariest ones of all, because you got this tip flying at you that if you touch that wrong, you chip the tip off, which is the last thing you want to do. So
yeah.
Anyway, that's once you've got the table, then you're going to make the stone whatever shape it is you want. And you'll notice that a lot of fancies, marquees and stuff like that, a lot of those are faceted girdles, which means they do as much of the forming as they can with the girdling machine, but they'll do the tips and stuff. They'll do that on a polishing wheel where you've got a lot more control.
Okay.
So let me show you.
So now we've got a diamond that has a table and a girdle, so it has an outline, but it's still, everything between the table and the girdle is still the rough, you know, if hypothetically it's the rough skin.
It's still the rough. Yeah, and quite often, to be honest with you, I will, before I go to girdling, here, let me get back on. Before I go to girdling, I will, I'll do some pre-forming on my wheel to cut some crown angles and some pavilion angles, so I know where I want my girdle to be.
Okay.
I do as much as I can on my wheel and as little as I can on the girdling machine, because the wheel, you have more control, and it's a little, I think, a little bit quicker to do it that way. But yeah, so the next process then is to go to the wheel, and let me show you what the wheel looks like. And here we'll move the camera again, see if it'll oblige me and come with. You have to excuse me, it's a brand new camera setup I got going here.
Special for
purchased just for this. So here is my wheel, and this is an old Slamco bench from New York as well. It's got an offset motor. This is old fashioned. Nowadays they have a motor directly underneath the wheel, so it's a direct drive. This is driven by a belt under there, if you can see that. And then here's the wheel itself, and my hand tools. So let me see if I can get I don't want to turn it on because it's really freaking noisy. So let's see.
Somebody had said, and I was thinking the same thing, really surprised to see that the chisel for the lathe is handheld. So really you have to be very careful with what you're doing with your hands when you're making that, when you're brooding.
Yeah, and you have to be careful with your breathing, and you have to be careful not to tense up to where your muscles get back. You know, I mean, there's a zen to all this stuff. you're not taught that stuff. When I first started cutting diamonds, I got tendonitis real bad from repetitive motion, and I had to relearn how to hold things and not do stupid things with my hands. A lot like piano players, you know, you get good real fast and then you think you stay young forever. Doesn't happen that way.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so when you come to the wheel, let's see, can you see that?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is a hand piece I use. Let me, oh shoot. Let me raise it up a bit. Maybe I can shoot down on it like this. So here's, this wheel then is cast iron. It goes about 3,000 RPMs. I use diamond dust. Traditional is diamond dust and olive oil mixed together.
Mm-hmm.
But what I use is a paste that has diamond dust in it. The interior part of the wheel, I'll use, here we go. Come on, stay. We'll make do here. We will get this done. There we go.
There we go.
Okay. So the interior part of the wheel is where I smooth.
Okay.
Now that I use different grades of dust, typically the grade of dust that you can buy is 0 to 1 microns.
Okay.
So
So
it's
it's the
super
same
fine.
that we use. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. But I have one for the smooth that I use on the inside and one for cutting a little bit hard, you know, quicker on the outside. The outside of the wheel, I mean, it goes to about 3,000 RPMs, but as anybody who understands math might know, the outside of the wheel goes faster than the inside of the wheel.
Yeah.
Because it goes more distance. So
Right.
faster, cuts better out here. The other thing is I would prefer, what's happening is any dust that migrates out towards the edge,
It's coarser.
if I've got the coarser dust on the inside, it's going to screw up my smoothing ring.
Yeah.
So, and what I do is I have one ring that I use. Now, not everybody does the same thing, but in between the two,
Yeah.
where I can touch the facet to the wheel to find out where it's touching, see if it's flat or not. And I can also touch to see if it's cutting or not.
Okay. So that's like your testing
And
spot.
so that's a testing spot, and it's a little bit more scoured up. You can actually see it's got some little silver spots there where it's, you know, it's touched the wheel. And so once I got it cutting, then I can go to cut. And I used to cut in just one spot. That's how I was trained on the wheel, and just get it harder and sharper and sharper. But now I use a motion where I'll go back and forth
Okay.
with my tongue and dop, get it to cut. So we don't traditionally do preforming and polish. We don't do cutting and polishing. We cut a facet until it's, you know, 99% finished.
Mm-hmm.
And then we finish it in the smooth ring.
Okay.
And
So
then we move to the next facet.
everything's happening on one dot, but you do have a couple different grits. So there is a little bit of correlation, but slightly different.
Right. And I can, with this dop, I can set up a facet, and then I can click to the next facet. Now this is for rounds.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got 16 clicks. So I can do 2 clicks to the next main facet, or, you know, that sort of thing. But because it's held together mechanically between the pot and the fingers, there's always a chance of a little slippage. So when I go to the next facet, it's not necessarily lined up where I want. You know, it's close.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not necessarily dead on accurate. So that's what the cheaters are for. So I'm constantly tweaking facets. I mean, there is never a time when I rely on the tool to tell me that the facet's right. What I rely on for that is my eye, the feel, and oddly enough, and this was something that I definitely wanted to talk about, and this is something that's very much lacking in mass manufactured diamonds, is diamond cutting evolved from single individuals trying to make the best faceted stone they could out of a piece of rough.
Mm-hmm.
When they did that, they learned what I consider chase the light. So that they knew they were doing the right thing when it looked right.
Yeah.
So if the diamond looked dark, they changed the angle to where it didn't look dark, to where it brightened up. If it got too bright, or they started seeing reflections that they didn't want to see, for instance, a reflection of the girdle in the table, then that was too flat, you know. So they relied on their eye to tell them what was beautiful and to tell them how light was being handled correctly. So there's automatic machines that replace this right here, this whole, where I set my tongue down and where I do my work. There's automatic machines that they use in factories now. That's a computer there. Now it has a dop at the end of it, and it's still cutting on a wheel like this, exactly like this.
Mm-hmm.
But that computer knows it hunts to find the grain. It knows it's found the grain when the dop is physically calibrated. There's a micrometer on the dop, and when the micrometer starts to move, it means the dop is starting to go into the wheel, which means diamond is being removed. So then it knows it's cutting. So there's a micrometer that tells it it's cutting. Once it's cutting, it keeps going, it keeps cutting until the wheel touches the metal of the pot that's holding the diamond, and that creates an electric circuit, which then picks the diamond, picks it up, and signals it to click to the next facet.
Okay.
So at no point does that machine see the diamond.
Yeah.
At no point does it see the polish. At no point does it see the midpoints. You know, the things that a skilled craftsman is looking for, which is the polish and the midpoints and the symmetry. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty spot on because that's all mechanical. Just click, you know, you do 360 degrees and divide it by 16 or 8, and bingo, you know, you make the machine that does that.
Yeah.
So the machine can do that, but the polish and the midpoints, even in most factory settings, that needs to be done hand finished to get the so-called triple X and all of that kind of business.
Yeah, because then you're going to basically cheat everything and tweak everything and also get the polish
until it's just yeah. And then of course the trick to doing that nicely is if it doesn't touch in one point, you know, you could always cheat it a little bit and touch that point, but then do you have a little false facet there?
Yeah.
That went to that point, or did the whole facet come to that point?
Yeah.
You know, and that's a real art form right there. And there, I can tell you there's a lot of labs that they don't see that anymore. I mean, if you have a little false facet there, they don't pay any attention to that. They used to be crazy about that stuff, but not so much anymore because a lot of the cut grading is done by Sarin machine.
Yeah.
Again, so optical comparators, not by human eye. So that's I use a 10 power loop. Everything's done by hand. I do each facet one at a time.
Okay.
You know, set each one up. So I can do any shape, whatever. It's, you know, I have different, this is top dop. This is for, I don't know if you can see it there. This is for the bottoms.
Okay. So it's basically just it's basically how it holds the stone in there, right? That's what makes the difference, whether it's in a claw or a pot or something like that.
Yeah. So here is for girdles. Okay. So I can hold the table and the pavilion together and just expose whatever's exposed is where you can cut at. And I have, so my basic tools are a table dop, a girdle dop, a top and a bottom dop.
And so in the olden days when they were using the lead the lead dops still, they could just get away with only having one handpiece, right? Because they can just basically move the diamond around in any direction inside of that lead.
Correct.
Okay, but now
Correct.
it's
And
now,
in fact, back in those days, the working with the lead is called verstelling. And there was a guy, and that's all he did. He was a versteller, and he would set up all the facets in lead. So you'd make one facet, take it back to him, he'd set up the next one for you and hand it to you.
wow.
You know, so you didn't even really necessarily see, you didn't see any of the stone except what you were cutting on. There was a cleaver, there was somebody who marked the stone for what you were going to do with it. There was the versteller who set stones all day long. There was girdlers who girdled stones all day long. Even in the old days, they did that. But there was always people who could do all of it.
Yeah.
Now, the guy that I learned from, what he was known for, what he considered himself most expert at, was what you would call preforming and blocking.
Yeah.
So putting the first 8 facets on top and bottom, and then a brilliantier would come and put the stars and the upper girdle facets and the lower girdle facets on.
Okay.
And the table got done last because the table is, all these tools I showed you are based on the fact that you've got a flat table. So you've got for the top, you've got fingers that come over the table. For the bottom, you've got the table resting on the pot and the fingers come over the pavilion facets. One of the new cuts that I've got has no table. So you can imagine all my tools are kind of not very useful for that. So I have to do a lot of hand configuring, and the labs can't grade it because they do all their cut grading and all their angle measurements and everything with a Cern machine, and that's based on putting a table flat down on the Cern machine.
Yeah, yeah.
And mine comes to a point.
So
and you can't put a point flat. I mean, it just can't do it. So
okay, so let me go through. We have quite a few questions from the audience that I haven't really been
good.
going through, but you were just touching on one, so I'll start there and then we'll go on. But Chris Mowat had asked, do you always start, with that table? Yeah, I think you just pretty much answered it. You start with the table and then you leave it there because your tools are using that as a reference point, right? And then at the end you put it where it needs to finally be. Is that how it is?
Yeah. Well, the table, usually I go ahead and like I said, I'm working with recuts, and very often the table's already made. And so I would polish it before I would do my stars. But basically it's done.
Because then you
everything
can
has
stretch
to
your
be
stars up into the table and close everything nicely.
They're on the edge, right, of the table. So
okay. And then, so do you guys generally go crown first or pavilion first, or does it matter if you've already once you've got the table in there?
It doesn't really matter. My order of succession is I attack whatever's the problem first.
Okay.
So if I've got a chip in the crown or a chip in the pavilion, or if I'm changing a tip, wherever my biggest problem is, I got to take care of that first. And very often that will then tell me, for instance, where's the girdle going to be?
Okay.
If I need to use some of this girdle to get out a flaw or a break, then you have a certain amount of leeway on you have less leeway on what your pavilion angle is than you do your crown angle. Okay. So it's about a 4-to-1 relationship. So if I move my crown angle by 1/4 of a degree, I've got about a degree of play on top that gives me the same results in terms of light return.
Okay.
Yeah, I try and get my bottom together the best I can to know I've got a decent, because that's your reflector. That's what really brings back all the light. Yeah. So I want that to be good first. And once that's good, then I let everything so-called figure out where it lays, on its own.
Okay.
And then you know how much girdle that you need to have and whatnot. But yeah, it's kind of a chess game. That
Yeah.
it's never the same.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of really impressed to see your sequence and your tools, because they are so much more similar to what I'm doing than I thought. I mean, I know, with colored stone cutting, it's kind of like, are you on a handpiece or a mass? But since I'm on a handpiece, my process and setup is almost exactly everything that you just said. I could have said it the same way with my tool, and even the two step diamond powder on the lap, I do the same exact thing, just I
Right.
have a couple steps before that. But for your blocking step, when you're putting in those first 8, or recutting or whatever, but what's the actual grit that you use on the outside to do that first step of blocking?
I don't know.
Oh.
It's diamond powder. It's it it it's essentially the same grit. I mean, what we used to traditionally, what you used is there's, and I have one here somewhere. There's a mortar and pestle made out of steel, and
Hmm.
you would take diamond crystals and put them in there and just pound the piss out of it, and you get diamond dust, and that's what you would use your for your grinding, for your cutting.
Hmm.
And for polishing, you would use what they call box powder, which is the powder created in the bruting process. So rubbing 2 diamonds together gives you a finer grit
Yeah.
than breaking diamond,
Hmm.
and so that's what the mixtures were back in the day. Nowadays, I tend to just buy grit that and I call the grit people and I say, what's your hottest ticket you got for getting the best smooth? And they'll send it to me. And then I'll say, and how about, cutting gnarly junk, what do you got for that? Send me that, so there's my cutting and my smoothing polishes. And I have no clue what they're putting in there, but it works,
Okay.
so I'm not going to argue with them. That's their business.
Right. But the outside one should be rougher, right? Otherwise it would take forever to block in the first 8.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
And
rougher.
there's, I've heard things over the years. Oh, there's this substance that they make now that's stronger than diamond, and the scientists in the lab and blah blah blah. I'm like, bring it. I've yet to see it. You bring me some of that stuff and just made my job. I don't have to worry about different positions on the wheel and all that stuff anymore. I can be like a colored stone cutter cutting diamonds.
Yeah.
Just put that sucker on a wheel and cut it. And it's never happened. So pardon me for being a little skeptical.
Yeah. And so, okay, another question from the audience. This is from Rod Knowles asking, when you're actually doing the cutting and you've got your table, do you ever have to readjust the height of the table or the depth of the table, or do you make everything else kind of come up and meet that table?
Um, the table, the best answer for that question, the table is the biggest facet on the diamond.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want you don't want to make it any bigger than you have to ever, because you're going to lose more weight.
Yeah.
So, if it gets too small, you got to make it bigger. Generally, it's the opposite problem. You got a big table, you're trying to make smaller, and that's difficult to do, because if you maintain your crown angles as you're making the table smaller, the girdle's getting
Yeah.
narrower and the table gets bigger by comparison, so you're kind of chasing your tail. But once the table is made, you make everything off of that and very little adjustment happens. Now, what I will do is, if I've got an old miner, an old European, very often one of the things we do is tip the table towards wherever the damage is, so that we can favor one side a little bit. And but when you do that, that's going to change all the angles of everything. So you got to be
Yeah.
really careful. Any adjustments you make in the table are going to affect everything else you've done.
Okay.
So you got to be really careful with the table.
And then,
Yeah.
so one thing that it comes to my mind that must be so different for you guys, what you were just saying, like if you just keep your crown angles, keep moving in, of course you lose the girdle, but then you don't want to tilt your mains down a little bit because that's messing with your light return, right? And it's going to mess with your,
It can, yeah, yeah.
right?
You have, I mean, there's variances, and it depends what you're after. But generally speaking, you have from about. It's interesting. We have these gauges. Let me grab them real quick. I'll show them to you because this turns out to be a pretty interesting story. So these are your basic gauges for measuring diamond angles. This one, for very obvious reasons, is called a butterfly gauge.
Okay.
And it has 4 angles on it. They're 1 degree apart. It goes 39, 40, 41, and 42. Ideally, you want an ideal cut round brilliant needs to be 40 3/4. There is no 40 3/4 on here. There's a 40 and a 41. So what you want to do is you slide the diamond in the 41 and you want just a little hair of light at the cullet. And then you slide it on 40 and you want just 3 times as much a hair of light at the girdle. Okay, and that, if it's even, then you're at 40 and a half. So that's how you measure that. Okay, now this to me is really interesting. This tool right here is my pride and joy. This is on 40 3/4. This I got given to me. It's like a regular carpenter's tool,
Mm-hmm.
but it's diamond size. It was given to me by Mr. Ludell, given to him by his father. It's on 40 3/4 and it is rusted into, I mean, it isn't moving.
Yeah.
And when I used to travel, I would carry this on my person. I would never put it in my luggage or anything like that. So this is spot on the money.
Okay.
Anything else, I don't have a gauge for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now on the crown, you go from 30 to 37 on this
Okay.
gauge, and that's called a star gauge. Now, what's interesting about those numbers is, like I said earlier on, I said diamond cutting evolved from individuals looking, given a piece and working it and making the prettiest piece they could. And when they got to these pretty pieces, those happened to be on certain angles. Now, when Marcel Tolkowski came along and figured out what the ideal angles were on the top and bottom of a diamond, he didn't just go out and do that theoretically. He actually worked in conjunction with his family, which were diamond cutters, and he asked the cutters, give me some samples of what you consider to be your best work, and he had a sample set. So if you read his book on diamond design, he talks about the sample set, and in that sample set, within that sample set, he comes up with what is the best angles.
Yeah.
And those angles then became the basis of what they called the ideal cut: 34.5 degrees on top, 53% table, 40 3/4 degrees on the bottom of the stone, plus the brilliant facets. And mathematically, this was it was actually he submitted it for a master's degree in optics.
Mm-hmm.
And back in those days, what they were doing was they were going through all these different materials and figuring out the optical properties of them. And he chose diamond because that was what his family did. And so anyway, that became known as the ideal cut. It didn't actually take off for a long time because it lost weight. You could get more weight by using different angles. GIA taught that as ideal proportions. They had proportion sets. That's what I learned when I started cutting diamonds, was those were the ideal proportions. those got eased up a bit, and they started saying, well, 54, 55, 56% tables are okay. And he didn't take into consideration the girdle thickness and, blah, 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 blah. Make a long story short, in the 1990s, they decided that the industry kind of decided that consumers had color grades and clarity grades, and they knew the weight of the stone, but there weren't any cut grades, and there was all kinds of cuts on the market, and we knew they traded for different prices. So doesn't the consumer deserve a report that has a cut grade? And the GIA said, well, we're looking into that, and then they kept saying, well, we're looking into that for years. And then they started backing up. Well, it turns out there's not exactly any such thing as ideal cut, and we're studying that. And AGS got fed up with it. And they're kind of sister organizations. They were started around this exact same time. And AGS said, no BS. So we have the standards, and we've had them for years, and we're going to issue a cut grade. So they issued a cut grade. And it was based on these proportion sets. So if you were, within, I don't know, a couple of degrees or 34.5 degrees on top, and if you were within a quarter of a degree or 40 3/4 on the bottom, then you could be an excellent cut or an ideal cut. And then but AGS had 0 to 10, it was their scale. They didn't use, excellent, very good, good, fair, and poor. They used 0 to 10. So instead of 5 grades, they had 11 grades. But be that as it may, they came up with what is now known as a proportion-based ideal cut grade. Now, mind you, this is based on Tokowski's ideal, which is based on what cutters had done in the past and on, math. So sort of verified. So then the AGS decide, finally 10 years after the AGS comes out with a cut grade, GIA comes out with a cut grade. And theirs is, they drop ideal, and they got like excellent, very good, good, fair, and poor. And so now the XXX, that's the big deal. Excellent polish, excellent symmetry, excellent proportions, which is a proportion-based cut grading system. Well, and that's taken off, and it's dominated the diamond market. And now along come these consumers saying, well, what about fancy cuts? And AGS said, well, that's a good question, because fancy cuts don't perform the same way as rounds. So how do we, and fancy cuts are kind of all over the place. What is it, a 2-to-1 ratio or 1.5-to-1 ratio, length to width, blah, 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 for emerald cut or marquee or an oval, how do we figure this out? And so they got a panel of us together, and we did a research thing to find out, to come up with 0 cut grades for fancies. And in order to do that, Gabby Tokowski actually, I think, was the one that really said, look, we can't go by proportions. We have to go by what the diamond does, by its actual performance, by its actual light performance. What does it do? And so we looked at all this light performance technology that was existent, and the AGS modified their ideal cut grade to become a light performance based cut grade. So, and they ran bazillion iterations of crown and pavilion angles from 1/10 of a degree variances, and they ran light performance tests of amount of light return, amount of, they've never really been able to handle scintillation very well, but definitely light return. And so anyway, long story short, Pete Yancey from the lab one day, he came up to me and he goes, Maarten, I got to tell you something. It's really interesting. It's really, you'll love this. And I said, what's that? He said, so we came up with the zeros, and they had to do the round first for light performance before they could do the fancies. And so they developed the whole system based on rounds. When they did it, and they put all these methodologies together, what was in the exact center of all of that? 34.5 degrees on top, 40 3/4 on bottom. So the science backed up what the artists had done and come up with in practice over the years. And I said, I'm not surprised because you can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I started seeing little things like, I remember there was and they should remain unnamed, there was a brand that came out that had 0 cut grades that performed better than all the other 0 cut grades. And I was like, what? Where do you come up with that? And people were, oh yeah, they got this machine, it shows it, and blah, 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 you know. So I said, I don't give a shit about a machine. Send me a diamond. I want to look at the freaking diamond. You swear to God it's got this report? And I go, yeah. So I look at the diamond, and sure as shit, every one of their diamonds, and at that point, I'm working for a company that prides itself on being the world's most perfectly cut diamond. And this is not them. Okay. So I'm looking at these and I'm going, I'll be damned. Every single one of their diamonds has stars that are longer than everybody else's. So all things equal, but the stars are longer. Huh. Wonder what the hell that's all about. I said, there must be something about their machinery which values star length more than it values, you know, that somehow in their algorithm, star length holds more weight. And that's why theirs keeps scoring better on their machine than all the other ones do. Sure enough, I looked at their patent and that's exactly what had happened. And what we learned at the same time, I was again talking to Pete, it turns out that star length, when they get to a certain length, the dispersion falls off.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so, you know, and so I've come full circle. I mean, I was a big champion of ideal cutting and all of this, and I've studied it at the top levels. But I got to tell you, it's what you see. And diamonds, what people have lost track of is that diamonds are unique and dynamic works of art. Okay, so they change under different lighting conditions, how they look, different lighting conditions. Your eye is not a camera. Your eye has an independent iris that adjusts for light, that you don't even know that's happening. So when you go outside in the dark, you can't see shit. You stand out there long enough, you start seeing things. You can start to see more clearly because your eye opens up more. You know, so we make and we have 2 eyes in all of these mechanical systems that judge diamond grading. It's, even the most sophisticated ones, they have 1 eye, and then the shadow of the head and all of this. It doesn't matter. Beauty comes it's not in the eye of the beholder, it's in the eyes of the beholder. We have binocular vision. Yeah. There's movement changes how a gemstone looks. Lighting changes how it looks. You know, remember mood stones? I mean, your mood changes how it looks. You know, so this business of even light performance, I think, is a bit of a misnomer. You know, how much, and light return is definitely a misnomer. I mean, you know, I'm a huge fan of the GemCAD and the ability to design new diamond designs or gem designs, and these softwares that you can then put it into, and you can do light ray tracing and all of that stuff. But, you know, I was probably 10, 15 years into my career when I first started teaching somebody, and I was up at the blackboard and I said, well, here's why we have 34, you know, this is it. So light comes in, it reflects, it hits this, and it comes back out the table. And that's what you want. And I'm standing there looking at it and going, wait a minute. As I'm teaching it, I'm going, wait a minute. If it's designed that all the light comes in from the top, comes back out the top, where in the hell are you in this picture?
Yeah.
Because if you're looking at it from the top, you can't be the light source unless you got a pith helmet on. You know, so, And so all of these methods, there's all kinds of machines out there that judge light performance and brilliance and dispersion and all of that, but they're cameras, and they're they're taking pictures of the light from the source, and it's returning back to the source. Well, your eyeball's in there somewhere. And in fact, two eyeballs are in there looking at from different places, and your head and your background. And, you know, at one point we had customers that were complaining to us. They said, your diamonds look dark. And I looked at my boss and I said, wait a minute, whoa, back up. I know these diamonds are nice. So who's making these complaints? And he goes, what are you talking about? I said, are women complaining or guys complaining? He goes, I don't know. And I said, well, go find out. And he came back and said, turns out it's mostly guys. And I said, well, it's no wonder. Guys are always wearing dark stuff. Women are wearing all this pretty stuff, you know, colors and you know, their hair is different colors. Guys in black suits, you know. The diamond reflects what it sees. So if you got colored lights going into the diamond, you're getting colored lights coming back, you know. So anyway, I take a completely different view about what diamonds are supposed to look like and than most. So anyway, sorry.
So then, no, I mean, it's, you know, that's what we're here for. We want to get the confessions and everything. But so anyway, to kind of come back around, you know, obviously you've done a lot of stuff since, you know, the late 70s or whatever, when you finished school. So what is it like now? You know, obviously now we're in a completely different world than the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s with cut grade and everything. As an independent diamond cutter who's obviously cutting in your house, is there still a market that sustains this? Could someone else follow in your footsteps and become an independent diamond cutter today, or is it something of the past, do you think?
It's a great question, and I'm not sure. I know that I have seen people have approached me to where retailers actually are far more interested in diamond cutters than they used to be, that they'd actually talk about having a diamond cutter on staff just so that they can show the customer that experience, you know, and they're more serious about it. I mean, there was a handful of people, I did it at one point in my career, and there's a handful of other cases where I've known that to be done. But it could be a trade. Right now in America, it is not, other than what you can carve out for yourself. No pun intended. But it's interesting. I mean, I could be super jaded about this. Like I said, when I started in the business, there was 10,000 cutters in New York. Today, you ask me, I think if I'm not mistaken, there's probably not a whole lot more than 100 cutters in the entire country. And almost none of them doing any manufacturing. It doesn't mean we can't. It means we didn't. You know, just like America did with all kinds of industry, we spun it all off to low-cost labor, and not just low-cost labor, low-cost land and factories and low-cost PhDs, you know, all around the world. And so we spun it all out, and there it sits out there. We could have done it ourselves. There is opportunity that is there. I've tried to pursue opportunity as much as I could in the trade. I haven't made my livelihood my whole career of, you know, almost 50 years as a cutter. Most of that time, my best livelihood has not been as a cutter. Because I was a cutter, that's why, but not because I wasn't getting paid for my cutting. So, yeah. For instance, you know, I mean, I was on the team that there were 7 of us that launched Hearts on Fire, which became a huge multi-country brand. It was the first real consumer brand diamond in the country. And I made good money, and I traveled, and I did a lot of interesting things with them. But mostly I got paid for training people how to sell a much higher quality and not just sell based on discounting all the time. Yeah. And having done all that for 20 years, the model in this country is still, I got the same thing as everybody else, but mine's cheaper, you know, so I don't know that I made much of a dent there. Lab grown diamonds are interesting. I mean, from a cutting point of view, they need to be cut, but um, they've been, most of that cutting is being done in India or China, mostly India and Indonesia, you know, a handful of countries, but not here. It could be done here. What's missing here, what's missing in the industry, in the diamond cutting industry, is it's still all mechanical. Even the automatic that I was describing to you, which is sort of the top technology. That technology is 25, 30-year-old technology in a new box. It's not, there's nothing new. It's mechanical. It's not CAD driven. It's, you can't, at this point, hopefully it's changing. I mean, I'm interested in projects where it looks like maybe that change will happen, but where you can make a design and you can send that design to a machine, and that machine can then preform that design for you. And, you know, maybe you need to hand finish it still. I don't know. Maybe it can be finished. I don't know. But sort of CNC style cutting, there's no reason that can't happen. It hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened because the investments haven't been made. When I first went to work in the lab grown industry, I went in because they told me that there was an opportunity to cut in the United States. That's what their goal was. And they were in Silicon Valley, and they had, you know, in my mind, it was like, yeah, buddy, you guys have the ability to do this. You have the entrepreneurial spirit, you have the wherewithal, you have the skill sets here to pull off computerization at the level that it needs to be done to make it competitive in the world market. But that didn't happen. It went back overseas to China because it was cheaper, you know, and it makes the model work.
Well, I know,
makes it profitable sooner.
Yeah. I know the first time that I met you when you were giving a talk in that show in California, it must have been around 2014. So like, since, you know, the big trend that's happened since then of, you know, hugely available synthetic diamonds hadn't happened yet, but
Right.
but you were talking about it that day, and I remember you being kind of excited about it because you were talking about being able to do kind of innovative kind of cuts because suddenly you
Right.
had the availability of, you know, not just recuts, but maybe from rough shapes or bigger shapes or whatever. So let's talk a little bit about that, like just in terms of the design aspect, because I've got one friend in Geneva who is a diamond cutter, who occasionally tells me similar things. You know, they said, we never really get to do custom designs, but when we do, they sell instantly. But
Yeah.
we for whatever reason, they just can't do it. I don't know if it's because they don't own the stones or what, but what's that like?
I mean, that's the bulk of it. And like I said, to me, the attraction of the lab grown was that they can make the material inexpensive enough that you can practice with it. You know, with colored stones, I mean, what the hell? You can take a piece of amethyst or whatever and cost you nothing to make a mistake. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, fine. But with a diamond, I mean, even a half carat diamond of any kind of quality, you're talking, you know, $1,000, $1,500. It's a mistake. And who's got that kind of pocket money? So traditionally, if you look at, and one of the things I like about following you is that you've been very involved with gem cutting history. And I'm very interested in diamond cutting history as well. But the round brilliant diamond did not take off until diamonds were found in South Africa. And diamonds were found in South Africa in such a volume. A lot of people don't know this. The first year of production, I think it's the first 2 years of production in South Africa, eclipsed the entire production of diamonds in the world to date when that happened.
It's like 1,000 years of history.
So all of a sudden, they had mountains of diamonds compared to what they used to have. at the same time that the monarchies, so this is the 1860s, the monarchies are starting to fall in Europe. The traditional places where you sold valuable diamonds were going away, you know, and now those diamonds sit in museums. And if you look in the museums around the world, you see diamonds. You don't see round, brilliant diamonds. You see domes, you see pear shapes, you see briolettes, you see everything but rounds. Now, the reason you see rounds is when they got all these diamonds in South Africa, they need to figure out a way to get them to market, make some money out of it. Well, a couple things had to happen. One thing had to happen is they needed to tool up. They needed to get better at what they did. The girdling machine was invented around that time. Yeah. So all of a sudden they could make diamonds round. So they could saw diamonds and make them round. Yeah. Holy cow. Now you can got this production process. Ba-doom, ba-doom, ba-doom. 4 on top, 8 mains on top, 8 on bottom. Brilliant, dear little baby, punk them out, get them out there. Well, still, but who are you going to sell them to? And that's when they opened up the U.S. market for engagements, and then they started selling them on size. If you get her a fifth of a carat, great. If you get her quarter of a carat, you're even more of a hero. And my God, if you give her a half carat, then it's better than the Joneses next door, and on and on and on. So this marketing campaign started with De Beers, and the round brilliant took off, and it dominated the market space. It dominates manufacturing today. It dominates the way our tools are built. And, it didn't take me long to figure out that, hey, what is so sacrosanct about a 58 facet round brilliant? What about more facets? What about less facets? Yeah. I think there's a point where you get too many facets, it becomes blurry and it's not so great. But what happens if you get rid of the table, like I did on my designs? It adds another layer of complexity. It adds another round of reflection. It takes away 55, 60% glare off of the top of your diamond. It does all kinds of cool stuff. But where's the market for that? In order to develop a market for that, you got to have money to buy rough. And we talked about that at the beginning here. When you're talking about money to buy rough, to be a site buyer, whether it's De Beers or Al Rosa or whoever you're buying from today, there's 4 or 5 major players today. De Beers is still one. I think the Russians are the biggest, but De Beers is second. So between the two of them, they control probably 70, 80% of the market. To buy from them, you got to spend $5-6 million every 5 weeks.
So you have to have
that's a lot of money.
You have to have an industry around you to do that.
Even if you want to do a niche market, which I would love to do with my stuff. In order to do that, in order to get any kind of sales volume going, in order to get any kind of production going for some apprentices or whatnot, you got to be in some jewelry stores. Mm-hmm. Be in those jewelry stores, you got to have a display. You got to have a display that commands some kind of attention. It can't just be a single stone sitting in the guy's vault, because he's not going to show it unless somebody asks, and nobody's going to ask if they don't see it. So you have this chicken and egg phenomena that goes on. So in order to get into them, you got to make sure that they've got an adequate display. Well, to have an adequate display of diamonds, let's say that jeweler might have to come up with let's say $50,000, maybe $100,000 to have enough sizes and a couple of, pair of earrings and a ring and a pendant, just the simplest little display. Well, they're not so sure they want to come up with that money, because that's money and times are tight and, whatever. So they want you to front it to them. Now you got, okay, so I front that to you, and now I got to front that to, 25 other your buddies to see if they're going to. Well, if you front it to them, they're not so inclined to sell it as something that they own. So, I mean, these are all practical problems of getting something to market. So, designing and cutting is one thing. Marketing is completely different. Yeah. So if somebody comes to me and says, I want your design, I make it for them, they buy it, gone, finished. My Rose Brilliant that I cut, the American Rose Brilliant, I've sold every one I've ever made. Now, to be honest with you, I haven't made that many because I don't buy rough.
Yeah.
And, you know, I do them from recuts, whatever. It's an organic and slow growing process. Unless I have a rough manufacturer who's interested in what I'm doing, I'm in tough shape. The rough manufacturers who are cutting rounds, they sell a 58,000 round Brilliant all day long. What the hell do they want to sell yours for?
Yeah, they don't want to change the game. They're
They don't want to change the game. So the diamond game is very conservative, and a lot of it has to do with how much money is involved. Small little changes can mean a lot of money has to go in a different bucket, and it's a risk. And they already have that risk covered, and they're already making money. So how are you going to convince them they're going to make better money than they're already making? Because you're just a little guy and they're the big shot. You know, so this is the kind of stuff in reality that you run up against as an individual cutter.
Yeah. So that, yeah, okay, that's kind of the sense that I had. I mean, I always had an idea that a lot of it had to do with the inability to get rough, but it's really, yeah, you've really painted a complicated picture there, and I sympathize. I can understand why it would be so attractive then to get into synthetic diamonds where you could actually control a bit more of that whole process, and of course take the overhead way down. You know,
well, you would think, but I mean, and there, again, you need a manufacturer who believes in it enough and is willing to market it. And most of these guys in the synthetic, in the synthetic business right now, a lot of that is in investment based right now. So it's the investors in the businesses themselves.
okay.
And until that shakes out, they're going with what people are asking for. You know, they're not going to go out. They're already pushing the system by offering something that is not natural. Now they got to offer you something that you didn't ask for, a shape that you know nothing about. You know,
Mm-hmm.
So that requires marketing dollars, and I'm not sure that they're any more willing than natural suppliers to do that.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's a solution. I mean, to me, it's an opportunity, and the opportunities in the business are, I'm encouraged by the fact that you can do design work now that you never, I mean, you used to have to do design work by hand and then go to the wheel and see if you can make it. Now you can make a credible model, a 3D model on a computer for nothing, cost you nothing.
Yeah.
And you have pretty damn reliable results that you're going to get a beautiful product at the end of the day if you make it.
Yeah.
You can really tweak it. You were never able to do that before.
So are you?
So that to me adds to our palette.
Yeah. Are you using software then when you're doing some of your original designs?
Not as much as I probably should. I've been aware of it. I've had the software for a long time. I mean, my designs are, have been put in, but I haven't done the tweaking. I actually done the tweaking on the wheel, and because I have a gut feel for what will work, and I've come up with some really astounding results. So I'm not too reliant on that equipment. And like I said, it has its limitations in terms of what you can actually see. But no, I'm very encouraged by the technology. I think that, as an artist, just because you've been doing it the same way all the time doesn't mean it's the only way to do it by any means. As a real artist, I think you should grab the opportunities as they come along. So if there's new machinery that you can use, there's always going to be an art to using that machinery better than somebody who just I mean, like I said earlier, I don't rely on the machinery, but the machinery is a tool, and an artist needs all the tools that they can get. Yeah. They shouldn't rely on the tool. They shouldn't depend on the tool, but they should have dependable tools.
Yeah.
And the more we have, the better off we are. So, I'm encouraged by several things. One is the technology. The other one is that I'm a believer in small scale mining.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the artisanal miners in Africa, for instance, have gotten, are getting more recognition as time goes on. It's a struggle. It has not been a pretty story for a long time. But I believe there's opportunities to integrate their story into the stories of diamonds,
Mm-hmm.
and to perhaps even integrate not just the fact that they mine in certain countries, but maybe that they can also use their own local artists to learn how to produce from those countries as well, so that they have diamonds that are mined and cut in countries, for instance, like in West Africa. And I think that there's retailers out there who are open to the possibility of having stories like that to tell, that they could tell to, you know, and even in the marketplace, I find America's the biggest marketplace for diamonds.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, the biggest market within the diamond market has traditionally been bridal. So almost all the advertising, almost all the sales are focused on bridal. Bridal is just one thing that happens in a person's life. You know, there's a lot of things that you commemorate with diamond. And so there's a lot of opportunity that's missed. I mean, even in the bridal category, you've got the bride, you know, getting an engagement ring, let's say a carat size. Does the guy get an engagement ring? Does the guy get, you know, he gets a wedding band, maybe has a couple little pieces of melly. Melly aren't manly. You know, I mean, when I started in the business, men used to come into the jewelry store. They had bigger diamonds than their wives did. They had a Masonic ring, you know, with a 3-carat diamond in it. And their wife had a 1/4-carat engagement ring. And I'm not lying. So, you know, and men in history, Louis XIV or Diamond Jim Brady. I mean, these people, men wore gemstones, and it was important to men. And we've lost, men are half of the population. We don't sell diamonds to men. That's easy pickings as far as I'm concerned. And nobody's even remotely gone after that.
Yeah.
Even me, I've had earrings since I was 16 years old. I mean, this is over 50 years. 50 years I've been wearing earrings. I have yet to walk into a jewelry store where I can choose a man's earring off a ramp. Where do I get my earrings? Oh, well, my wife lost one, so I get the other one. You know, that's where men get earrings. And, you know, this is like ridiculous. Our marketing is in the toilet compared to what it could be for diamonds.
Yeah.
The making of diamonds, the stuff that colored stone people do amazes me. The fantasy cuts, the concave faceting, none of that has touched the diamond business.
Yeah. I know, like, you know, there's a website for faceting diagrams, and there's like over 9,000 designs on there. So it's pretty impressive to think. And it's amazing that hasn't at all impacted the world of diamonds at all. You know, there's still the same like 20 cuts that there were 100 years ago, basically.
20.
Or like
There's
6.
Brown, Pear, Marquis is making a comeback.
Yeah.
Heaven forbid. Princess. You know, there's like 7. That's it. It's like, it's pathetic. And when you show somebody something different, it's really interesting. At the counter, I've done this many times. You show them something different, and their eyes just roll. They're like, "Whoa, unbelievable!" And you say, "Well, would you like it?" Well, I don't know. You know, well, why not? Well, because I don't know. You know, because my friends didn't tell me this, and because I didn't see any ads for it, and yeah, I like it, but I don't know, is it really going to stand the test of time? You know, so there's so much resistance because you know, and it's not because people don't get excited.
Yeah.
It's because we don't know how to push that button. And especially we don't know how to push it when we keep saying, well, I can get it for you cheaper, you know.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that. I showed you this, that it's too expensive for you, you know.
Well, let me get back into the questions from the audience before we run out of time here, because there's a few good ones that
Sure.
I definitely want to get to. But somebody had just asked, do you ever work with jewelry, or are you setting, or are you just diamond cutting?
I'm just a cutter.
Okay.
That's, people go, oh yeah, a cutter. Can you fix my wedding band? No, 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 no. I actually had a jeweler's bench for a while because I needed to pull stones out of mountings and stuff. But I cut diamonds. I don't cut color, and I don't make jewelry. I cut diamonds. It's a
Yeah.
specialty.
So
Um,
Antoinette Matlin's asked way back in the beginning, what was your most challenging cutting job? And I think maybe that's an interesting story somewhere in there.
this one, okay, this one blew my mind. Um, so there is this technology out there that they call nano etching,
Mm-hmm.
where they they use a plasma gas to etch diamonds, and they generally do it on the pavilion side, and it's called they claim it gives the diamond more dispersion, more colors of the rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't, so let's say there's a patch of this etching on the back of the diamond. You cannot see each individual groove that has been etched into the diamond because they're so fine. You need an electron microscope to see each groove, but you can see the patch. It's kind of a gray kind of look to it. But what it does is it creates this jagged surface which diffracts light differently. So if you think about a CD, your typical CD disc, if you take it out in the sun and move it around, it's like iridescent.
Yeah.
All those colors of the rainbow come off. It's not because light went into it and came back out of it. It's because light was reflected off that surface like that. And so they do this on the bottom of diamonds to increase the fire, to make them more beautiful, they say. So it's called nano etching. At the time I was doing it, I was working with a company that were doing it for fire polish, they called it. I didn't think it was polish. Etching and polish to me are two different things. And it's not really fire in the sense that we think of fire as dispersion, which is light entering the gemstone and then splitting into colors of rainbow and coming back out. And like I said, this is more like iridescence in an opal. Okay, so it's just these different
Bouncing off
surfaces are
things. And
yeah. So anyway, to do this, what they would do, my understanding of it anyway, is they would mask the stone with some kind of masking agent, except for where they wanted it etched. And then they put it in the plasma gas chamber and it would get etched. Well, and then they take it out and then they boil off acid, whatever they use to get rid of the masking agent. Well, sometimes the etching didn't take exactly the way they wanted it. Maybe there was a little piece of masking where the etching needed to go, and it looked like a little black hole in the etching. So there was problems with it.
mm-hmm.
And I mean, a lot of it was not problematic, was fine, but when they had problems, they would send the stones to me to remove the etching,
Okay.
so they could start over again.
So
And this etching, like I said, this is just in the polish, and it's like you hit that facet flat for a split second and it's gone because it's so micro. I mean, you can see the patch, but you can't even see the polishing, the grooves. So it's like chasing ghosts, but you can see it when it's gone and you can see it when it's there. So what had happened was they had a batch, and it doesn't change the color of the diamond. It doesn't do any of that. But they had a batch where it did change the color of the diamond. It changed the color of the diamond by a couple of color grades. And they could not see that it was an acid burn or a burn or anything like that. They really didn't know why. But they assumed it was on the surface. And so they asked me, could I repolish these diamonds to see if the grade would come back? And I said, yeah, sure, you know. So I did, and I polished. They sent me a batch, I don't know, 10 of them or something like that, and I did them all. And then, and sure enough, that's what it was. So then they sent me one. It was a 2 carat, and it had definitely gotten browner, and so they needed it fixed. And they said, you know, can you do this one? And I said, well, yeah, but I gotta ethically, I gotta tell you, you know, it weighs 2 carats now. Have you talked to your customer? Because it will not weigh 2 carats when it's done. Okay, because you're going to lose some weight doing this.
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, well, nah, okay, we'll check. And so they did, and they called the customer, and the customer said, yeah, go ahead and whatever, do it. Because they had to admit to the customer they made a mistake.
Yeah.
And then have it fixed and then do it again, you know. So they did that, and they sent it back to me, and I put it on my scale, and it actually weighed 2.005 carats.
By a hair.
And I called them and I told them, you know, you actually have 0.005, but I'm telling you, there's no way in hell. I mean, you're going to get a 199 out of this, and maybe some change, but, and I refaceted 57 facets plus the faceted girdle, 2.000.
Wow.
5,000th of a carat, and I changed the color back to what it was. So you want to talk about challenging. That was probably the most challenging, maybe not the most exciting to anybody else, because most people want to know what's the biggest one you've ever cut, you know. And to me, that's about the value, but the challenges are, you know, and this is all by hand eye, you know, catching it flat. This is, and I got to tell you, probably the biggest satisfaction I get is people ask me to do XXX hearts and arrows type of cutting.
Mm-hmm.
And like I kind of alluded to earlier, as an individual craftsman, I don't believe in that, because that's a manufacturing phenomena, and you need the rough to begin with. You need to set it up so you get the polish guaranteed. You need to mic everything really close to tolerances. And I'm doing all this stuff by hand, and then you got to give it to the lab and what it is that they say, and they see something, one little thing that they see, and all of a sudden, you know, one polishing line on one facet on a girdle or something, and you're not excellent anymore, you know. And it's like, no, I'm not playing that game. I'll give you the best diamond I can. But I got to tell you, by eye, without my butterfly gauge, without my star gauge, just by eye, I make hearts and arrows diamonds. And I make them because I've been taught how to make facets parallel to one another in the table, how to make them on the same azimuth, same angle, by eye, by looking at different plumb lines and reflections of light within the diamond as I'm working on it. And so when I finish a diamond and put it under a hearts and arrows viewer, or put it in the asset scope from AGS, and see those kind of results that I got by not measuring anything, by just doing what my eye sees and my hands are capable of producing, I take a lot of pride in that. I think that's, you know, I don't believe that you can cut a diamond perfectly. I think I don't know that you even want to. It's kind of something I aspire to, but I can tell you there's not a diamond I've ever cut that doesn't have a mistake on it somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, it might be a mistake so infinitesimal that nobody can find it, but I know when I made it. And the mistake sometimes is so small, but you know you made it, but damn, you can't go back over it because it's going to make it worse.
Yeah.
You know, as you try and correct the mistake. So one of the words that I learned from the old man who taught me, which is an old jazz term, which is a kind of a nice word for life in general. It's definitely a nice word for the trade, is you make it copacetic.
Okay.
Whether it's right or not, if it looks right, if it's copacetic. you're smooth, you're good.
Okay.
So, move on.
Okay, there's a couple more technical questions in there, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
Going back to the beginning when we were talking about laser sawing versus the traditional methods of sawing, can you visually see the difference, or doesn't it's not a visual thing? It's just about directions.
Um, well, a traditional sawing, if I get a stone that's sawed with a traditional method, it comes back and it looks like the 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 saw plane looks like a facet that has cutting lines on
Okay.
it. And they're a little bit curved because it's a saw blade,
Right.
okay, that's left those. If it's been laser sawed, that burns the surface.
Okay.
So that's usually carbonized. So that I can see the difference in the surface. In either case, both of those have to be polished off.
Yeah.
And with a saw, sometimes it's a little more uneven. And so when you go, when they saw, if you have to take into consideration for weight loss the width of the saw blade plus whatever it'll take to get that plane flat on the grinding wheel and polished. Same thing with laser sawing. Laser sawing is more beneficial because you can go in different directions.
Yeah.
And what they're finding now is they'll put a piece of rough on a sewing machine and they can plan it out for different stones, send that to the laser room and get these different stones all cut out of the piece of rough. That's much, much more complicated than it was when they were using traditional sawing because you could only saw in certain directions.
Yeah.
So they're able to make more shapes and retain, I think, a little bit more weight that way. So I mean, that's interesting. The water jet, I'm not really it's pretty new. It's only been in the last few years. I don't know that I've ever even seen that surface yet.
Mm-hmm.
So
I know I saw one recently just from a promo video of one of the companies that was making it, and they're saying it's a water jet with a laser inside, and the
yeah,
laser reflects off the internal RI of the water, which was just like, whoa, physics, that's crazy.
whatever it is, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's so
beyond my scope. Yeah.
it's cool, but it's super pinpoints because the water can focus the laser better than the light, the normal laser light can do. But
Right, and the laser machines that I've seen, they kind of, in order to go through a piece of rough, they kind of pulsate back and forth like
yeah,
this
and the water ones don't do that.
because so that by the time they're all the way through, so that you can make it all the way through. If they just start cutting down, it'll stop. So it's more of a little kind of a V shape.
Yeah.
The groove that they make.
Yeah.
But again, a lot of that's just, that's computer driven, almost all of that.
Yeah. And
Very
another
little.
another technical question that I meant to ask you before when you were talking about blocking, or really with any facet really, but I guess more importantly with blocking, do you do your rough step and then your fine polish before going on, or do you put all the facets in and then go back and do the final polishing? For
No, you make the facet, you cut it and polish it, and then you move to the next one.
okay. And
So no, I mean, I can do some preforming where maybe I leave the cutting lines on because I know I'm going to go back over and cut some more material off.
mm-hmm.
But once I'm on a facet to finish it, I'm cutting it and polishing it all in the same operate because I've got it all set up.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go back and set all that stuff up all over again.
Right.
And that's where you get your meat points, and that's where you get the final polish and the meat points
Yeah.
come right
Yeah,
there.
I totally understand. For me in my practice with the handpiece on colored stones, it's the same. Once we've found that angle, we don't want to go back. That's I would say the biggest difference between the colored stone cutters using handpieces and masked. It's really easy to go back and find the same facet on the mask, but on the handpiece, same as you, we've taken a little bit of work to get to that perfect moment. We don't want to have to set
Exactly.
that up again. We don't even want to switch laps because you have to find it all over again because
That's
the
right.
angle changes. So yeah,
That's right.
I didn't expect that your technique and my technique, or really though the diamond cutter's technique, was so similar to the colored stone handpiece. But now I feel like I must try cutting a diamond sometime because it will probably be somewhat familiar. Obviously, some things are really different with understanding the grain and the time that it takes. We didn't speak about that,
Yeah.
but the time is a lot different.
Well, and that was one of the questions that you had sent me earlier, that it's interesting because that comes up a lot, and it's interesting about how we get paid, is the time element, because most people are used to getting paid for their time of work. So people are like, how long does it take to cut a 1 carat diamond? How long does a facet take to cut? And like I was explaining at the very, very beginning, we have different grain orientations in the diamond, and some of those grain orientations are tougher to cut than others.
Hmm.
So how long does it take to cut a facet? Like till it's done. And some of them can cut really fast, and some of them can cut really slow. And I mean, I've had a table facet on a 3-point that took me a couple of days to finish.
Hmm.
One frickin' facet, and then I've had them on, where in that amount of time you would run through the entire stone by then. So what I used to tell people that I thought was kind of interesting, it's a little bit of a stretch, but it's pretty much the truth. If you have a cutter like myself cutting from a sod stone, a 1 carat diamond, it should, let's say probably take about 8 hours to do a good job.
Okay.
Okay, man, there are people who say, oh, it's slow, I could do it in 4, whatever. Let's say it's 8 hours on average. In a diamond cutting factory, you can have four machines on one wheel. You can have 4 of those stations around one operator. Okay, so one operator can work 16 machines. Each one of those machines, you set it up, the first facet, let's say on the top of a diamond, and then you let it go. In about an hour, a little red light will come on and say it's done with that series. Next, do the next one. So every hour you're getting the top done, and every hour you're getting the bottom done.
Okay.
So every 2 hours you're putting out a diamond on 16 machines.
You're talking about
So that's
you're talking automated, right? Not just.
automatic machines, right?
But even I've seen
So
in
with the,
other diamond factories, sometimes one cutter has 2 or 4 hand pieces on his bench with weights
yeah,
on them. Just
yeah,
and he's
and
doing
what
them all
they're
at once.
yeah, and that's the guy that taught me. That's what he would do. He would have one that he's working on finishing, and then 3 that he's just removing rough material. He's doing some preforming with.
Okay.
I have never used but one work. Well, I have 2 stations. If I run into a stone that has a facet like the one I was describing where it's taken all day, I can set it back there and put some weight on it and let it go. And I can work on other stuff at the same time. So I have 2 stations, but 4 stations, that's just,
Yeah.
I'm doing brilliant deering. Nobody's working 4 stations brilliant deering. You got to be on top of that.
Because
And
that's
I'm
all about
doing
meters,
that.
right?
Exactly. And that is, it's like one that you're working on all day, and that's plenty. So, yeah, in any case, basically what my argument, what I was setting up is it takes a machine in a factory, you can punk out a 1 carat, you can punk out something like 64 1 carat diamonds in a day with one operator. But
Yeah.
all he's doing is following the bouncing ball.
Yeah.
He's letting the machines do the work. I'm working the machines and I'm making one. So there's the difference in time and the difference in labor. So you can imagine, I mean, there's a good reason that all these diamonds are being mass manufactured the way they are.
Yeah.
Because it's just so, but the bulk of the price of a diamond, of a finished diamond, is not in the labor. It's in the price of the rough.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, final question, which leads me to my outro slide. Where can we see a photo of one of your, unique stones that doesn't have the table? Is there photos online somewhere?
Yeah, there's, in fact, on my website, which is americandiamondcutter.com,
Okay.
there's, if you go there, there is on the home page, there's a little block that says American Rose Brilliant, and you can go there and click on the explanation of it, the diagram of it, and you can also click on a video of it, which shows one in different lighting conditions, in daylight, shop light, whatnot. So
Okay.
yeah, you can see the explanation of how I came about it, and what the diagram looks like, and also a video of the actual cut itself.
Cool. Okay. So yeah,
So it's
people and
americandiamondcutter.com. And if you want to get a hold of me personally, you can get a hold of me through that site, or it's my first name, Maarten, Maarten, at americandiamondcutter.com.
okay, cool. So yeah,
So
people
either
and then you're kind of regularly on Facebook as well, right? So if people want to,
unfortunately, I'm on there way too much,
yeah,
but yeah.
I feel you. Okay, well, Maarten, thank you so much. It's been super, super fun, super informative. I feel like all the questions I ever had now are answered. The only thing left to do is actually try and cut a diamond
Well,
one day. So
when
maybe I'll come say
post COVID, you get to wherever I am, we'll do it.
hi. Okay,
Sounds
sounds like
great.
a plan. Okay, and thanks so much to all the guests for once again joining us for another episode of Gemcutting Conversations. I will be back in the new year, January 10th, maybe talking to a Czech cutter or maybe an American cutter. I'm still negotiating right now, but one way or the other, it's going to be fun. And
Oh, if you could get somebody to cut me a check, that'd be great.
I'll try,
Just kidding.
see what I can do. Okay, well,
No,
Maarten,
it,
you
I
have,
gotta, let me just add too, I'm really thankful for the opportunity to do this. This is a lot of fun for me. And I really respect what Justin is doing. The history of what we do is really important. The stories that he's getting out of people, I think, are equally important. So thanks a lot for inviting me, and thanks everybody for coming. This is really fun.
yeah, well,
And
I'm
hope
happy
to
to
see
get
you.
your story, and it's not often that we even hear about American diamond cutters at this point, so it's cool to kind of get inside, even though you're kind of the rebel of the community, but just to get a little bit of understanding of what it's like, because especially in the world of colored stones, like I literally don't have contact with any diamond people cutting or even selling, so it's just like different universe somehow tangentially connected to the one that I'm in. So it's kind of cool to
Yeah,
get your inside view.
we're all connected, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay,
Thanks a
well,
lot.
thanks so much, and you have a great holiday season because we're almost at that point now. Catch you
We
later.
are.
I'll come
All
see
right,
you in
bye-bye.
Boise
Thank
and we can
you.
do something live in person. Okay, see you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.